East African history. The Nandi resistance 1895–1906. The Nandi resistance 1895–1906. The Nandi put up a strong and prolonged battle against the British in 1895. The rebellion took place in western Kenya, particularly in the Uasin Gishu Plateau. Causes of the Nandi resistance. The Nandi fought the British in order to defend their independence, i.e., they didn't want British interference in their society affairs. The Nandi did not want to see any stranger crossing their land, and in 1895 they killed a British trader, Peter West, and this sparked off the war. The religious prophecy of Okoyot Kinneal also inspired the Nandi to fight the British, e.g., he warned that the Nandi land would at one time be ruled by foreigners. The construction of the Uganda Railway also provided the Nandi with an excuse to fight the British, i.e., Prophet Okoyot had warned them of the big iron snake belching smoke that came from the east to quench its thirst in the west. Lake Victoria. They believed that they were militarily superior because they had successfully defeated and raided all their neighbours, e.g. the Maasai. The Nandi also resisted because they believed in their cultural superiority and didn't want the British to pollute their culture, e.g. they resented the British dressing code and looked at it as the Nandi female devils. The Nandi also had the belief that their land was the most fertile land in the whole world and therefore didn't want to lose it to the British colonialists. The Nandi also resisted because their traditional enemies and neighbours, the Maasai and Laya, had collaborated with the British. Nandi were a warrior society that took pride in fighting and raiding, and therefore when the British came, they took it as a chance to show their military might. The Nandi resistance was also inspired by other rebellions like the Hihi and Abashiri revolts in Tanganyika. The Nandi also had an environment advantage, i.e. the Nandi Hills were suitable for war with little space for open warfare. The rise of Nandi nationalism towards the end of the 19th century also inspired the Nandi to challenge the British. East African history. The Nandi resistance 1895–1906. The course of the Nandi resistance. Clashes between the British and the Nandi began in 1895 when a British traitor, Peter West, was killed by the Nandi for attempting to cross their land. The British responded immediately by sending a force under General Cunningham comprised of 6 British and several Sudanese and Swahili mercenaries. This force was defeated with 30 of their men killed. In 1897, the Nandi successfully attacked the British and destroyed their mail system. The British organised another force under the command of Truman and even recruited Maasai mercenaries, but still they were crushed. In 1900, when the Uganda Railway reached their area, the Nandi often raided the equipment deposits, stole telegram wires and killed the Indian railway workers before disappearing into the hills. At the same time, the Nandi attacked the Luo and Lai tribes that were under the British and raided traders passing through that area. The British mobilised a stronger force comprising of Uganda, Maasai and Sudanese mercenaries, but still they were crushed. This greatly worried the British, who resorted to burning villages and confiscating Nandi cows. But the Nandi didn't give up. After suffering several losses, the British decided to change tactics and adopted peaceful negotiations to end the war because they wanted the railway construction to go on. The Nandi were also tired of the war. Negotiations begun and an agreement was reached. The Nandi allowed the British to build centres in Kipsum and Kapkolai. Peace was short-lived and the Nandi resumed their attacks on the railway builders and looting telegram wires. In 1902, the British organised an expedition which registered minimum success in this time. The British decided to use force and diplomacy. In the same year, the British built a strong force of about 1,500 soldiers, but its diplomacy, which ended the Nandi Wars. In 1905, a British commander, Colonel Maynard Hogan, visited the Nandi leader Okoyot Kinneal, Samwe Ab Kinneal, and as he came out to greet his visitors, he was shot dead with some. East African history. The Nandi resistance 1895–1906. The Nandi were forced into reserves in the north, far away from the railway lines, so that construction work would go on and their fertile lands were given to European settlers. Why the Nandi resisted the British for so long? Unlike other rebellions, the Nandi put up a prolonged resistance against the British for over 11 years. The Nandi were involved in LDT, through which they were able to acquire guns from their neighbours, the Akamba. The Nandi pride, i.e., they were a superior race militarily and culturally, which gave them determination to fight the British for so long. The emergence of Okoyot Kinneal provided the necessary leadership for the wars because this united the Nandi and gave them morale. The Nandi never suffered from famine because their land was fertile and could therefore support agriculture, which provided enough food for their troops. Being a warrior society, the Nandi had a lot of experience in fighting, e.g. they had a long history of successfully defeating their neighbours like Maasai, Laya and Luo. The Nandi area had an environment advantage because it was hilly with little space for open warfare, and the British could not use their Maxim gun effectively. The Nandi had a strong, organised and highly disciplined army which was divided into units and companies based on clans and place of residence. Nandi employed the guerrilla tactic, which involved ambushes, hit and run, especially at night, and this always surprised the British, who were unprepared for these fights. The cutting of telecommunication lines by the Nandi hindered the transportation of British troops and reinforcements. The Nandi lacked offensive unity, e.g. forts and barracks, which could have been possible targets for the British forces. The presence of blacksmiths among the Nandi, who constantly made iron weapons like spears, arrows, and these were used to strengthen the Nandi army. Why the Nandi finally lost the war? The British had a lot of determination because this was delaying colonialism and they wanted to construct the Uganda Railway. East African history, the Nandi resistance, 1895–1906. The British always got support from neighbouring countries, e.g. Uganda, Sudan and Egypt, in form of troops and ammunitions, weapons. The British always recruited mercenaries into their army, e.g. Maasai and Sudanese mercenaries, who made their army grow stronger. The Nandi lacked support from their immediate neighbours like the Maasai, which greatly led to their defeat. The recruited mercenaries knew about the Nandi military tactics, which information was used by the British to defeat the Nandi. The scorched earth policy employed by the British greatly weakened the Nandi because several farms and houses were destroyed, and this left the Nandi suffering. Many of the Nandi troops and people were always killed by the tropical diseases and famine, which reduced on their military might. The Nandi neighbours who were hired as mercenaries also had the determination to support the British and defeat the Nandi, who had terrorised them for so long. The British tricked the Nandi into negotiations and agreements into accepting to work with the British, also weakened the Nandi military might. British missionaries used the tactic of spreading Christianity, which brought about disunity amongst the Nandi. Effects of the Nandi resistance. There was heavy loss of lives, especially the Africans, which led to depopulation in the area. There was massive destruction of property, e.g. villages and food stores were all set on fire, and this led to famine. The Nandi lost their land to the white settlers and the Uganda railway line and were pushed to infertile lands in the north. There was widespread poverty and misery in the Nandi area due to the serious economic destruction. The Nandi were overpowered and therefore defeated, which completely marked the end of their independence. Some of the Nandi who lost their land to the Europeans were forced to migrate to towns and urban centres to make ends meet. East African history, the Nandi resistance, 1895–1906. The Nandi superiority and arrogance in the region was crushed mainly because they had terrorised and bullied most of their neighbours. Many people were converted to Christianity because the teachings of Prophet Koitel had failed to guide them into defeating the British. Forts and European stations were built throughout the AEG in Kiptum and Kapkolai after the defeat of the Nandi. With the defeat of the Nandi, more Europeans poured into Kenya and took over the Kenyan highlands. The Nandi resistance taught the British a lesson that the Africans could also put up an organised resistance.